And I'm not the only one who thinks so. The rest of the nation has taken notice of what we've done here in Minnesota and how we've done it. The truth is, no matter where you go in this beautiful country, people tend to want the same basic things out of the American life. And when I say basic things, I mean things like a meaningful work, safe neighborhoods, good schools, affordable health care. But I also mean something more, something that's a little bit harder to define or to quantify. People want security. They want to feel like their life is built on a solid foundation that won't fall away if something goes wrong. People want opportunity. They want to feel like they can get ahead instead of just trying to settle for getting by. And they want their kids to have chances that they never had. And maybe most of all, people want freedom to live their own lives the way they want to live them, even if it's not the way their neighbors would want to live their lives. Security, opportunity, freedom. I hear it everywhere I go. And every time I do, I find myself feeling proud of Minnesota. The truth is, all of America would like to have what we have. And talk about security. We've given parents peace of mind through a child tax credit that is expected to cut childhood poverty by half. And every parent in this state knows their child's going to get a belly full, breakfast and lunch, so they can learn when they go to school. That's security. That's security. And we together passed the nation's most aggressive expansion of labor rights. Because a job's just not a job. It's a means to a secure life. And it should come with benefits, like earned safe and sick time and the right to collectively bargain for a better life. Financial security, job security, and we've invested collectively together time and hundreds of millions of dollars in fighting crime. And by the way, because of that work, crime is down across the state of Minnesota. I'm trying. That is something to celebrate. That is something to celebrate. We've worked together to eliminate Social Security's taxes on the vast majority of Minnesota's seniors so nobody's parents will choose between prescription drugs and groceries. Invested in cutting crime, cut taxes. Those are things to celebrate. And in just a few months, we'll have one of the nation's most generous family and medical leave policies because no one should worry about losing their income while taking care of a loved one. That's a good bill. And when it comes to opportunity, we've passed unprecedented funding for public education, and we worked in a bipartisan manner to make sure our kids actually get the benefits from that funding by enhancing our literacy programs together. We've invested in bringing competitive, high-paying jobs to our state and growing our economy with an eye towards a green energy and innovation jobs that will shape the future. We're not just one of the best states in which to start a business, we're proving to be one of America's most popular states to grow a business. Just look at Phillips, Solventum, Sofidel, and the Mayo Clinic, investing billions to create thousands of new jobs right here in Minnesota. And let's talk about freedom. Here in Minnesota, that freedom means several things. It means freedom from hunger and poverty. It means the freedom to worship or not. It means the freedom to be who you are any way you choose. And that is a birthright, not dependent on how much money you make, where your family came from, or the current issue of the day. That's what freedom looks like. Those are the things that make Minnesota great. That's why we are America's best place for kids. And it's also the reason I love serving in this job with all of you. Now tonight, with the state of our state as strong as it's ever been, we gather to write the next chapter in this great Minnesota story. But I can't help but point out that we also gather at a moment of great uncertainty for our nation. And let's be honest, this uncertainty, this chaos is no accident. The President of the United States has chosen to destroy the federal government's ability to help people. He literally hired the richest man in the world to take a chainsaw to the basic services that Minnesotans rely on to build better lives. His plan leaves nobody there working to prevent the next pandemic, nobody to pick up the phone at the Social Security office, nobody making sure kids with special needs get the quality education they deserve. Just a few months ago, Minnesotans who got ripped off by a bank, a credit card company, a healthcare company, could go to some place in the federal government and seek help and relief. But now the government switched sides. Under this administration, the federal government exists to help the corporations as they screw the American people over. Next up, Medicaid. And everybody in this room and across Minnesota, let's be very clear what it means. 40% of children and more than 1 million of our neighbors in the state of Minnesota rely on Medicaid for their health care. This administration wants to take that health care away. Meanwhile, rural hospitals will be forced to close. All the rest of us, our costs will go up, and state budget will be torn to pieces. The President has also chosen, and I stress this, chosen to tear up the values that once made America the shining light of the world. Now, in this land of the free and home of the brave, we have university students being swept up, shoved into unmarked vans, and fathers being tossed into Salvadorian gulags without a hint of due process. So I want to be real clear about this. If you say you love freedom, but you don't believe freedom is for everybody, then the thing you love isn't freedom, it's privilege. And on an hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis, the President of the United States has chosen to throw our economy into turmoil. Global markets are teetering on the brink of collapse. Businesses across this country and here in Minnesota are already laying off employees by the thousands. Working people are paying more for basic goods, and if you haven't checked your 401k lately, don't do it. So let's be very clear. None of this had to happen. When the President took office 3 months ago, there was no reason to throw a wrench in the works and destroy decades of work. But if you listen to anything that comes out of his mouth, one thing has become clear. He's just plain confused about how the world really works for working people. We're talking about a guy that slapped a 10% tariff on an island populated only by penguins. It'd be funny as hell if it wasn't true and stupid. It makes no sense to anyone. That isn't servant leadership. It's not any kind of leadership. It's small, it's weak, and it's petty. It takes the awesome power of the federal government and turns it into a crude weapon, wielded by a man who wants to be king. As governor, I will continue to do everything in my power to protect Minnesotans from getting hurt and continue to provide shelter from the storm for Minnesotans. But I want to be clear. It is not enough to complain about the damage of the administration is causing. It's not even enough to try and clean up as much of this mess as we can. We need to prove to the people of Minnesota and to the American people there is a better way to govern. Because the truth is, this current administration in Washington, they're not forever. These small petty men will disappear into the dustbin of history, and when they do, there will be an opportunity and an obligation to actually rebuild government so that it works for working people. If we're all going to seize the opportunity, we have to be ready to show that we can be trusted with that obligation. If we want to earn back the trust of the American people in government, we have to be honest about the fact government hasn't always deserved that trust in the first place. And if we want the chance to govern righteously, if we want the chance to govern ambitiously, then we have to do a better job of proving that we can govern responsibly. Which brings me to this year's budget. 2 years ago, we made historic investments in our people and in our future. And I want to be very clear. We are not walking away from the commitments we've made to our schools, to our health care, to green energy, to public safety, to feeding our kids, and to taking care of seniors. We keep that promise. In fact, it is just the opposite. This year's budget protects those ambitious investments by embracing a spirit of responsibility and addressing some long-term budget challenges so that future leaders don't have to make impossible choices. So let me explain a little bit on this. Years ago, before many of us were here in St. Paul, members of both parties made a series of choices specifically around human services spending that has put us on a path of unsustainable cost growth. In just a few years, the biggest of these human services program will eat up $1 in every $8. We could ignore the problem for now. We'd have a surplus after this year. The wave won't crash this year, but it will crash. But while the problem was not the fault of many in this room, the solution should be our responsibility. So I'm proposing that we come together, DFLers and Republicans, House and Senate, and address this issue that we all inherited. For the economists in the crowd, my budget will be balanced for years to come. And in just the next 2 years, it will cut the structural imbalance by half. For everyone else, it's really this simple. Right now, we are the most generous state in the nation when it comes to the programs and services providing people with disabilities, and we should be damn proud of that. And the good news is this. After my budget is passed, we will still be the most generous state in the nation when it comes to these programs and services. And because of the efficiencies that we proposed, we will be able to continue being the most generous state in the nation for many years to come. Bottom line. Bottom line, if we don't govern responsibly, someone else will get a chance to govern irresponsibly, and I refuse to let that happen. Another way we're protecting investments is by doing more to prevent, investigate, and punish fraud in government. We all agree. I thought you'd like that. But look, it's easy to demagogue government spending. The truth is, as long as there have been programs aimed at helping people, there have been people looking to steal from those who need them the most. We've made strides in catching the bad actors, stopping their schemes. We've sent a lot of crooks to prison, but we can do more. Minnesota should have a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to misuse of taxpayer dollars and theft. And earlier this year, we took action. I know it's being worked on in this chamber, and earlier this year, I issued an executive order to strengthen our state's capacity to investigate fraud by establishing a centralized fraud and financial crimes unit at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. I have a proposal before this chamber to use artificial intelligence to sniff out and catch the bad actors before they get their hands on the money, and a proposal to increase criminal penalties for theft of public funds by 20%. Bottom line, I believe that when criminals try to steal public funding, you don't cut the funding, you stop the criminals. And that's exactly what we do. We're also working to improve the efficiency and customer service across state agencies. It's not enough to just spend taxpayer money responsibly. You should also be spending it effectively. We've already made some strides in that. I look at just a little thing. A couple weeks ago, shopping at Cub, I can stop at a kiosk after the checkout, and in 3 minutes, I can renew the tabs for my car right at that spot. You don't have to go to the DMV. It saves us money. It's more efficient for you, and it's government meeting people where they're at. People deserve more bang for their buck, and that's exactly what this budget will deliver. Look, we're not the only ones that are undergoing scrutiny and looking at our budgets. Families across this state are sitting down at their kitchen tables trying to figure out how they're going to afford the president's tariff tax. And I can't stop those pointless policies coming from Washington. They're making everything more expensive. But we can do a few things here to make those difficult conversations around that table just a little bit easier. This year, I'm proposing an unprecedented tax cut for working people, a reduction in the statewide sales tax. We've never done this in our state's history, but I will tell you, it feels like there might not be a better time to do this. And make no mistake about it. Unlike the president's tax cuts for the very wealthy, our tax cuts are fully paid for. We're doing it by closing loopholes that the wealthy use to avoid paying the taxes in the first place. Yes, and we're going to do this. Finally, we're going to ask the big health insurance companies to start paying their fair share with a reasonable increase. A reasonable increase that hasn't been raised in decades on the surcharge that we already ask HMOs to pay. Even as the administration pushes for nearly $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, which would shift the cost to states like Minnesota, we're making sure that that burden doesn't fall on working families. It can fall on the insurance companies. Now, we got about 4 weeks. We're going to get time to go through this line by line together, hammering out a final proposal that allows us to move forward as one Minnesota and the best place for kids to grow up. This budget was not written to please everyone. It was written to bring everyone to the table. And when we get there, we're going to have disagreements, no doubt. My progressive friends might have wished we were cutting a little less. My conservative friends might wish we were cutting a little bit more. My wife wishes that I would take the pay raise that was offered, but I turn it down. But this is how government's supposed to work. It's not supposed to be one old man sitting in the Oval Office sending out middle-of-the-night tweets that shot markets into freefall. It's not supposed to be a bunch of 20-somethings unelected showing up at federal agencies and firing everyone. It's not supposed to be chaos and destruction. It's supposed to be good people elected by their neighbors with differing opinions coming together to negotiate in good faith. Our legislature is narrowly divided, but I believe we can unify around those ideas: security, opportunity, freedom. I believe we can continue to make Minnesota the best place to live, work, and raise a family. And I think we got a chance. And I believe we can show people, folks across the nation who are watching, that we can still work together to improve lives. Let's show the world what servant leadership really looks like. Thank you, and God bless each and every one of you, and God bless the great state of Minnesota. Let's get to work.
And that was Governor Tim Walz in his State of the State address to a joint session at the Minnesota Capitol. He spoke for about 23 minutes. As you could tell, it was a little bit about what the state faces in terms of budgetary challenges, and a lot about Donald Trump and his presidential administration and the changes that are coming out of Washington. So the governor, as you know, just coming off this vice presidential run, is really trying to keep a foot in both camps, and I think the speech was aimed at kind of that dual messaging. So in a little bit, we're going to hear from the Republican and House and Senate leaders, as well as some DFL and Senate reaction, House and Senate reaction, if we can get to that in time. But we're also going to go to the House floor to hear from our Dana Ferguson, who was in the chamber as the governor delivered his remarks. Dana, the governor is still making his way out, shaking the hands of dignitaries, but what was it like in there in terms of the reception the governor got? I don't know that we have Dana yet. Dana? Okay. Well, maybe Dana can't hear me because of the applause, but I'm sure she'll speak up when she gets there. The governor, of course, is still there in the chamber and making his way out. But Dana, tell us more about the reception the governor got in the room as he delivered his remarks.
Yeah, it was really a mixed bag. I'm sitting behind the Republican contingent in the chamber here. There were a few comments he made about the president and the president's policies that went off very well with the Democratic members of the chamber, but Republicans were shaking their heads or at times booing the governor's comments. It felt a bit like a pep rally in here, or a campaign rally more so than a typical State of the State address, a little bit divisive here at times.
And for our audience, we should note that the Senate and the House have to actually adjourn their session, so that's some of the bustling you hear in the background as folks move about and get ready to leave the chamber. They are in the middle of a very busy phase at the Capitol, and the governor's speech does come quite late, doesn't it, Dana?
It does. It's coming with just about 3 weeks left in the session. They're really in the heat of the budget writing and passing phase right now, getting budget bills through committees onto the floors and into conference committees so that they can hopefully be working through some negotiations between the chambers and with the governor and get the final bills passed off before May 19th, the adjournment date.
And Dana, as you noted, there were Republicans who were sometimes sitting still and very quiet while the Democrats were on their feet and cheering. But there was one point in the speech where everybody got to their feet, and it was about the governor's remarks about fighting fraud.
Right. Yes, there was a lot of support from both sides of the chamber here. As he said, he really wants to do more to prevent and to catch fraud in government programs. And I anticipate that's something we're going to hear more about in the last few weeks of session. That's been a big priority for Republicans.
Well, both parties are taking that on as a top issue. We still don't have a deal as to how far they'll go.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Well, both sides are working toward a goal of ratcheting up investigations and clamping down on fraud. There's not a common agreement yet as to how to do that, is there?
That's right. That's something they're still negotiating, and I anticipate it could be a late in session deal that gets struck over exactly what some sort of package might look like in terms of fighting fraud.
Well, our Dana Ferguson, senior political reporter from the floor of the Minnesota Capitol in the House, where Governor Tim Walz has just delivered a State of the State. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
Back in studio here, we're joined by former NPR News politics editor, my boss, Mike Mulcahy. Mike, you said you were listening for that two-tone message, one aimed at the Minnesota and one aimed at Washington. How did it go over to you?
Well, it seemed to me, Brian, and I'm going to use some stronger words than you used, that this was a speech that was very sharply critical of President Donald Trump and the president's agenda. At one point, he called the president an old man sitting in the Oval Office sending out late-night tweets. He said he's chosen to tear up, destroy the federal government's ability to help Minnesotans. He's chosen to tear up the values that once made America the shining light of the world, and he's chosen to throw our economy into turmoil. I mean, that's about, it almost sounded like he was trying to put out the Democratic national message there. And then at the same time, he was trying to do that balancing act to call on the Republicans in the room to work with him to pass the state budget. I don't know if how the Republicans are going to feel about that, and maybe we'll hear from some later here in the hour to find out.
And if you're just tuning in to our live special coverage of Governor Tim Walz's State of the State speech, we've got a little bit of what Mike is talking about with the governor, comparing what's going on in Minnesota to what's going on nationally.
I want to be clear. It is not enough to complain about the damage of the administration is causing. It's not even enough to try and clean up as much of this mess as we can. We need to prove to the people of Minnesota and to the American people there is a better way to govern. Because the truth is, this current administration in Washington, they're not forever. These small petty men will disappear into the dustbin of history, and when they do, there will be an opportunity and an obligation to actually rebuild government so that it works for working people.
And
now, is that a 2028 campaign message?
Well, it does seem as though we hear a lot about, are the Democrats still trying to find what their message is, how to counter this new Trump administration that is supercharged perhaps from the first one. What did you hear in that?
It sounded to me, now I guess you could look at that two different ways. One, he's talking about, okay, we need to step into the breach here as a state and provide this firewall against this chaos. But it also, doesn't it sound like he's saying we as Democrats need to prove to the people that we are capable of being leaders again? So it sounded to me like he's still got one foot in that national campaign. And as much as he was trying to appeal to the legislature to pass his budget, that was really sort of the stronger part of the speech.
Two words he used, chaos and chosen, that the president has chosen to impose chaos on in various ways, and he kind of summed it up as both parties can be for freedom. It's just a matter of what freedom means, and I think we're going to hear a little bit of that here.
So I want to be real clear about this. If you say you love freedom, but you don't believe freedom is for everybody, then the thing you love isn't freedom, it's privilege. And on an hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis, the President of the United States has chosen to throw our economy into turmoil. Global markets are teetering on the brink of collapse. Businesses across this country and here in Minnesota are already laying off employees by the thousands. Working people are paying more for basic goods, and if you haven't checked your 401k lately, don't do it. So let's be very clear. None of this had to happen. When the president took office 3 months ago, there was no reason to throw a wrench in the works and destroy decades of work. But if you listen to anything that comes out of his mouth, one thing has become clear. He's just plain confused about how the world really works for working people.
And as we await lawmakers to make their way downstairs to give reaction to Assembly members of the press, I just want to note that this is the governor's 7th State of the State address, only his 4th delivered at the state capitol. He's been, during COVID, he did it from the governor's mansion, and then from Mankato West High School, where he taught. He went to Owatonna last year. But it was also interesting, Mike, as you noted, as you saw, he used a teleprompter, something he hasn't been known to do over the years until his vice presidential run.
Right. When he ran for vice president, he said that was the first time he used it. It's interesting, though, Brian, listening to those remarks about freedom. And you brought up COVID. We really are in this post-COVID world. And, when the governor talks about freedom, a lot of the Republicans in that chamber think back to that time of COVID when the governor had those emergency powers and was shutting down large parts of the economy, making people work from home. And I think when they hear him talk about freedom, their minds kind of go to that, and they don't they don't think his definition of freedom is the same as theirs.
So the governor talked about how much he loves doing the job. He hasn't said whether he's going to try to do the job for a third term in Minnesota. That would be a rare thing. You would know better than I, but no governor has won 3 consecutive 4-year terms in Minnesota.
Right.
And the DFL has had this office for 16 years, which is a big run for them, and they were locked out for many decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess we'll have to wait and see. I was listening for that, too, to see if he would give a hint. I think at one point he did say that he loves this job. He loves serving in this job, but he didn't necessarily say that he loves it so much he wants another go-around at it next year.
And he said that he's waiting till after the session to make that announcement. Tom Cran had the chance to talk to former Republican Governor Tim Pawlenty earlier today. And, as you remember, Tim Pawlenty ran for president after leaving the governor's office. He had some space in between. Let's hear about how he talks about the challenges of being governor or not being governor and run for president.
Well, there is just a basic time on task element that comes to play, which is how much of your time are you allocating to the national profile that you're trying to build or maintain, and how much of your time are you in Minnesota doing the work of governor? And those two things are in some tension. And so watching how he allocates his time as a resource over the next 6 months to a year is going to be interesting. And then as it relates to the national audience, the Democratic Party has moved, decidedly more progressive, decidedly left, and maybe not all of Minnesota appreciates that so much. So if he's going to also run for governor for a third term, how does he balance those two things? A national audience that wants a fire-breathing kind of lefty, and a Minnesota audience, at least in part, that would prefer somebody more moderate.
Mike, what do you make of that analysis?
Well, I think Tim Pawlenty is about one of the best political analysts out there, and I think he hit the nail on the head there. I think he's, he took heat when he was governor because he had national ambitions.
Where was Timmy?
Right, and so it's a great question, and there's the problem with people seeking 3 terms is that when you're governor, you make a lot of friends, but everything you do tends to cut both ways, and you make a lot of enemies too. And so that kind of ups the hurdle of getting a third term. And look no further than the state employees, which should be a strong constituency for him, but now he's called them back to work.
On June 1st,
and
for halftime at least.
And the unions, they don't like it at all. They said that he didn't consult with them, and they're upset about it. So, I don't know. It's a little tough to predict what's going to happen. As you know, everything's been so wild the past few years. Impossible to predict what's going to happen. But it'll be fascinating to watch, and you get to do it. And I get to be at the lake. So,
well, as we're waiting for legislative leaders to react to the governor's State of the State address, we're talking with NPR News political editor emeritus. Should we call you that?
No.
Mike Mulcahy, who's come back to tell. He's covered many of these State of the State addresses, so he's very versed in it. This governor has the big task ahead of him and the lawmakers in the last month is to set that budget. And he talked a little bit about how they can do that together, given the dynamics at the Capitol, which are unusually, maybe unprecedentedly close this time.
Now, we got about 4 weeks. We're going to get time to go through this line by line together, hammering out a final proposal that allows us to move forward as one Minnesota and the best place for kids to grow up. This budget was not written to please everyone. It was written to bring everyone to the table. And when we get there, we're going to have disagreements, no doubt. My progressive friends might have wished we were cutting a little less. My conservative friends might wish we were cutting a little bit more.
The governor talked about, the two sides. In the House, it's 67-67. No space between the two parties. And in the Senate, it's 34-32 with a special election next week that could bring it back to 34-33. Mike, do we have any feel as to how this last month process is going to go?
I'm not watching it as closely as you are, Brian, but here's what I see. You say it's 67-67 in the House. They need 68 to pass a bill. So they've got to convince somebody to come over on the other side if they want to get their vision passed here. It seems like they're hung up in the House on education right now and on health care.
The two big money areas.
The two biggest parts of the budget. So, in some ways it's surprising they've made as much progress as they have, given how the session started with that boycott by the DFL members as they were trying to work out that power sharing agreement.
Session really didn't get started till the middle of March.
Right. And so, the governor also talked about his proposal to cut some human services, or at least the increase in some human services spending to sort of buy down that shortfall in the out years. I'm sorry, I'm getting into the jargon. It's hard not to, but we have to watch what's going to happen here in the next week or so on those two big areas, education and healthcare. And if the legislature can agree on an approach, that's a good sign that they'll get this done by the end of session. If not, well, then we could be looking at overtime, and the July 1 is the ultimate deadline where parts of the government will start to shut down if there's not a budget in place. But I think the one thing that I mentioned before the governor started talking is, with this uncertainty from Washington, what effect is that going to have on the budget as you get into these 2 years of the biennium? And so will the legislature have to come back anyway to try to fix that?
Well, that's a good point. The Constitution requires that the budget be balanced at the end of the biennium. So that's still a good, 20 months away, 20-some months away. There seems to be a realization that they might have to meet in special session if the Medicaid money that the governor talked about goes away. So do you think they might do a partial budget and then call that good?
I would think that is unlikely, but as I say, you've watched a million of these too, and you might have you're closer to it now than I am. I think they're going to try to get a budget done, and they're going to try to get it done by the deadline, and I think what the governor's message is going to be, and I think maybe he was trying to get there tonight, is we don't know what's going to come out of Washington. It's going to be very uncertain. So let's get our ducks in a row here so we're ready and we can come back and act quickly if we have to. I mean, that's the message I would be trying to tell these folks if I were there. Thank God I'm not.
Mike, this might even be before your time, but the last time the House was 67 to 67 was 1979. And did we learn anything from that as to how these budget bills pass? Should we expect them to pass on a razor-thin margin, or do you think there's going to be kind of a wink and a nod? You put up a number of votes, we'll put up a number of votes, so nobody has to be the deciding vote on anything.
I would suspect that that's the way they want it to play out, that you have a healthy majority to pass these bills. And some of that may be, the Democrats are going to have to eat some things in these big, huge budget bills that they don't like. The Republicans are going to have to eat some things that they don't like. And it may come down to some issues that are not necessarily involved with the budget, like the fraud fighting that the governor talked about. Maybe there's a deal to be had there, and that will help, smooth things out for some of these other issues. It's just really hard to say. And when the margin is tied like this, and you don't have enough votes to pass a bill, it tends to empower every single member. So let's see. We'll hang on to your hat. We'll see what happens.
So before we go to what we expect to be some reaction from legislative leaders very soon from the Capitol, I want to play another part of the governor's speech where he talked about Minnesota almost being the envy of the country. And, he's doing that for multiple reasons, obviously, because if Minnesota looks better, he might look better. But let's hear that.
The rest of the nation has taken notice of what we've done here in Minnesota and how we've done it. The truth is, no matter where you go in this beautiful country, people tend to want the same basic things out of the American life. And when I say basic things, I mean things like a meaningful work, safe neighborhoods, good schools, affordable health care. But I also mean something more, something that's a little bit harder to define or to quantify. People want security. They want to feel like their life is built on a solid foundation that won't fall away if something goes wrong. People want opportunity. They want to feel like they can get ahead instead of just trying to settle for getting by. And they want their kids to have chances that they never had. And maybe most of all, people want freedom to live their own lives the way they want to live them, even if it's not the way their neighbors would want to live their lives.
Security, opportunity, freedom, those words he emphasized but just before that remark, those used to be Republican calling card words. Mm-hmm. What's he doing there?
Well, I think he's trying to point out and maybe remind people that a lot of people voted for Donald Trump in the 2024 election because they wanted costs to come down. They wanted things to be a little more normal. They wanted to move past that COVID shutdown. And here we are 3 months into the president's administration, and it just seems kind of chaotic, and it seems kind of wild, and there's stuff coming out of Washington every day that's just, it's not helping. So maybe he's trying to argue that if we can get our job done and land this plane on time and safely, it's going to help all of us politically. And, that's probably the case. That's certainly the case.
Should the Democrats be banking on 2026 being a Democratic year, or is it just too far away?
I think it's too far away. I think, I don't think you can bank on anything at this point, which is why I think it, if the governor is counseling people, it should be to put your head down, get to work, get the job done. And, that's going to make the voters more satisfied. At least that's the hope. And then, we'll fight out next year.
And we should note, sitting just to the governor's left, in front of the House chamber was Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who seemingly is not going to be running with Tim Walz if he runs again. She's running for the U.S. Senate. How much are their fortunes tied together?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, there has to be a primary on the DFL Senate side, right? Because there's more than one candidate running. Probably be a primary on the Republican side, too. Who knows who's going to run for governor on the Republican side? Who knows if Tim Walz is going to run for governor? But yeah, I think you're right. It probably won't be a Walz-Flanagan ticket if it is a Walz ticket. And then who does he choose? Does he try to move more toward the center because Peggy Flanagan was seen as one of the more progressive members of the party? And he needed her to help him win that primary when he first ran for governor in 2018. A lot of questions, Brian, a lot of stuff you and your team are going to have to figure out here.
And we still don't know how close their relationship is at this stage. It has been close over the years, but there seemed to be at least some fraying after the governor's vice presidential run.
Right. And she was there tonight. She didn't come in with the other constitutional officers, though, did she?
No, she didn't. We were wondering if she would come in, and in fact she did. There was one other dignitary there, no former governors there, but Congresswoman Betty McCollum was in the chamber. If the governor runs again, does he have any threat of facing some challenge from within his party, or do you think he's got that sealed down?
I would think that he would have it sealed down at this point. I think it would be tough to unseat him from within the party. But again, anything can happen. These jobs aren't guaranteed, and the nomination isn't guaranteed. So, there could be opposition. I wouldn't expect it, but I think everybody's just waiting to see what he does.
Are we surprised that we haven't heard more Republicans say for sure they're running, some big-name Republicans running for this job? I mean, it's a job they've wanted for a long time. A lot of would-be governors in that chamber tonight, I'd imagine.
Well, and it's been a long time, though, since a Republican won statewide. A long time since there was a Republican governor. It was Tim Pawlenty, right? Mm-hmm. And even then, there was a stronger third-party presence in the state. And I don't believe he won either time with a majority of the vote. So, yeah.
You're right. You're correct.
Yeah. I don't know. It seems like the Democrats are in good shape, and especially you would think in a midterm year when Donald Trump is the president, the Democrats might have a good year. But there's a lot of things that are going to happen between now and then.
And as we wait for these legislative leaders, we expect to hear from Republicans, and we just want to let our audience know that we might have to dip out near the end, but you can always tune into Morning Edition to hear more. We're going to go to Fresh Air at the top of the hour because we want to get back to our regular programming, but we do want to hear as much as we can before we go back to our scheduled programming. But it looks like the Democrats beat the Republicans down to the press room, so maybe we should just hear a little bit about the remarks that they're going to give here.
Portman, we've just come from the governor's state address, where he gave a brief and rousing, I think, and purposeful set of remarks about where we are in this moment in Minnesota and where he hopes that we head together for our future. I was grateful to hear him spend time talking about the things that we have accomplished already for the people of Minnesota in the work that we did in 23 and 24. And the reason why that's important is to remind Minnesotans that the work that we did together in 23 in the budget that we passed is an undergirding for a future that is uncertain because of what's happening in Washington, D.C. Things like strong investments in our public schools, undergirding our healthcare system, money into housing, the child tax credit, and school meals are all elements of the budget that we put together that will help Minnesotans through an uncertain time in a potential recession that we can't control and we can't predict, but we've done our work to begin to prepare Minnesotans for what could be a really challenging year ahead. I'm proud of the fact that he was clear about what he is seeing coming from Washington, D.C., and I spent the last week while we were on interim across the state of Minnesota, 10 community visits, 5 town halls. We came to talk about Minnesota, and Minnesotans showed up in strong and powerful numbers, and they wanted to talk about their concerns about cuts to Medicaid, cuts to housing, the loss of jobs, tariffs, and its impact on the economy and their way of life. Minnesotans are rightfully concerned, and they came and they shared that with us in numbers of 500 and 600 at a time in rural communities across the state of Minnesota. We have a very challenging month ahead of us, but I am confident with my colleagues in the House and the Senate that we will put this budget together, it will balance, and Minnesotans will see that we are here to fight for them and for the future that we believe in for the people across the state of Minnesota, regardless of where we live, who we are, who we love. It is important that the governor struck such a strong note on freedom. It is the watchword of today in this environment, and I'm grateful that he was so clear about that. And with that, I'll turn it to Speaker Emerita Hortman.
And that was Senate Majority Leader Erin Murphy, who was giving some of the Democratic reaction to the governor's State of the State address. Republican lawmakers will follow the Democrats, but we'll be back in our regular programming. So a reminder to our audience to tune into Morning Edition with Kathy Wurzer tomorrow to hear some of the Republican reaction to the governor's State of the State address. But in the couple minutes we have left, I just want to talk to Mike Mulcahy about the Minnesota Senate being the kind of the odd man out in this arrangement. They are.
That the governor grounded us in some of the important values. I thought that the themes that he chose, security, opportunity, freedom, really those are the things that Minnesotans have told us that they value the most, and that we should be able to work across party lines to get a good budget enacted that honors all of those things and honors what Minnesotans are looking for us from state government. With that, I'll turn it over to Jamie Long.
Thank you. I think it is clear to all Minnesotans that you can't talk about the state of the state right now without talking about the impact that the federal chaos is having in the state, and I'm glad that Governor Walz was so crystal clear about what those impacts are, from the cuts to Medicaid, which could dramatically impact the budget that we are taking on negotiations on in the coming weeks, to the impacts to freedom from university students in Minnesota who are being snatched up, to the impacts on people's pocketbooks from impacts on tariffs. So I think that perhaps that was not your typical state of the state to be talking so much about the federal impacts, but it's because they are so present in people's lives and so present in the work that we're doing at the Capitol and impacting the work that we're doing up here every day. So I thought it was a very strong speech and very clearly laid out the challenges that we're facing coming from the federal government and the opportunities we have to work together here at the state.
Take like 2 minutes of questions if anybody has any, or we'll turn it over to the Republicans.
Conversation about collaboration tonight. Is that an indication of how things are going behind closed doors when you guys are talking?
I am really happy to share that in the Senate you can see both when we're in the chamber together, in the work that is happening in the committees, and in the interpersonal work that we're doing, including my weekly walk with Leader Johnson, that we have the intention to do the people's work, to do it in the open, to do it together, and to get done on time. That's our hope.
It was noted it was not a typical State of the State address, addressing so many federals. So is it Governor Walz running for governor and or running for president after tonight?
You know, I think right now we're really focused on what's happening here at the end of the session. So for the next 4 weeks, we're in the 15th week of the session. There are only 18 weeks in the session. We are going to be very focused on what's happening here in Minnesota in the state budget. And I think that all that other chit chat, we'll have time for that this summer and fall. But to the point of collaboration, behind closed doors, the meetings have been very cordial so far. We're just at the very beginning. I mean, if you want to think about the budget in alphabetical order, we started with A today, talked a little agriculture. We talked about veterans and military affairs too. And so we're starting to share with each other the different values we have and that we hope to see reflected in the budget. And I think if people are willing to find win-win solutions, as we have been able to do in the past under divided government, then we should be just fine.
Why do you think fraud was the biggest applause line? That and privilege for rich people, but I think...
Why was fraud so welcomed by the crowd?
Well, I think you saw Ben Davis jump up in the back row. I was pretty impressed to see the Republicans there on their feet to applaud the governor. That's great that we have bipartisan agreement that we should be able to work together on that. That should mean that we're able to do some good work in that area.
Can you speak to the health budget? Speaker Damon said that it has the biggest roadblock, which is the conversation about medical assistance for people who are undocumented. Republicans want to say, full stop, we're taking that away. Of course, that's something that Democrats approved in the trifecta. Is there any room for compromise there? I mean, how stuck are you?
There's a lot of outstanding issues in the health bill, and the finance pieces, I think, are there on the table for us to come together for a deal, but I'm not definitely going to negotiate that here. I think what you saw in 2023 and 2024, that we were very responsive to institutions like the Catholic Church and rural hospitals in making sure that we reduce that uncompensated care and that we treat one another, quite honestly, the way that our faiths teach us to treat one another. It was, I think, interesting that the Republicans had a press conference about that issue on the day that Pope Francis died. An individual who had dedicated so much of his life to talking about welcoming the migrant. And so, I certainly respect the Republicans have a different perspective on that, and we'll be talking with them about it. But when you look at how human beings should be treated, and you look at the economic reality of rural hospitals, those are two important reasons to continue where we are in state policy.
How involved and influential has the governor been in the budget negotiations?
Well, we're at the beginning. We're trying to get to the starting blocks, which is we've got to get a full House budget out and a full Senate budget out. The governor has already put his full budget in front of us, and so we really he's not involved at all in what we're passing out of the legislature. So really, we can't get to that point where his engagement is meaningful and makes a difference until we get the starting blocks set.
He's, remained clear about the objectives that he has in his budget. And we've been, if you will, warming up the room right now and getting ready for the negotiations that are in front of us. We still have to pass our budget bills off the floor.
It seems that each year, right around this time, some sticking points arise. I mean, one or several or whatever it may be. I'm curious if, to Caroline's question, if that healthcare issue could be that sticking point this year, if there are other things you guys are seeing some tension on right now?
You should spend a day with me because there are sticking points everywhere I go. There will be things. There will be things that emerge that we have to find resolution for. That is the way this body works. And so I think the more that we're surfacing them now, the better off we are in being able to resolve them, whether it is standing ground or finding a compromise.
And we won't know what all the areas of agreement and disagreement are until we get those bills through. So, for example, now that the House Veterans Bill is all put together and the House Housing Bill is all put together, we see there might be some interplay. The veterans budget is cutting veterans homelessness prevention by $10 million, yet the Housing Committee has a $75 million budget. So, as we get more of the bills on the table, then we can, start to solve the problems that are across issue areas. So it may be that something in a different arena breaks something loose in health.
How has the delayed start to the session impacted your timeline and progress?
It hasn't impacted it at all.
The governor mentioned that sort of after Trump and Musk are go to the dustbin of history, then we'll have an opportunity to rebuild our government. So what can you do right now, particularly with the budget and with Medicaid? Why even sort of pass a budget now when there might be these Medicaid cuts that the governor is talking about?
I think if we have an unstable budget here or one that's not passed, for people who are counting on what we will accomplish with that budget, their lives are less stable. So while there's a lot of uncertainty coming from Washington, D.C., and we know based on that resolution that the Congress has passed, that we face and Minnesotans face, potential very deep cuts. Those are in our future, and the best thing that we can do right now is to pass a stably balanced budget that people can count on. And that's the work that we have to do between now and the end of the session.
And Minnesota state government shuts down on July 1st if there's not a new budget. So we have to enact a budget not knowing what the federal government is going to do. I know some of our members of Congress are pretty convinced that we're going to be back here in special session, but we just can't know. I think the one hallmark of the Trump administration is unpredictability. One day there are tariffs, the next day there are not. And so until they take action at the federal level, we can't really prepare for it. And there's not a ton we can do to prevent them from decimating our budget by cutting Medicaid. We saw this during the first Trump administration when we were in the House together, that the most important thing for us to do is speak out against the things that Trump is doing that are harming people.
And to implore our members of Congress, particularly those of the same party as the president, to forestall these cuts and stand up for Minnesotans.
And I want to give, closing note, just a lot of credit to the Republicans in the Minnesota House and Senate who sent correspondence to their members of Congress asking for there not to be cuts to Medicaid. I think we're seeing brave Republicans standing up and speaking truth to power, and I think we should support when Republicans are taking those courageous actions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for being here with us. We'd like to give a few comments about what we just heard from Governor Walz and his State of the State. As you know, over the last 2 years, that $18 billion of surplus was spent. Another $10 billion raised on all of us, on all of our taxes and fees, to an unsustainable budget. I was very, very pleased to hear, though, that the governor has realized that we are heading toward a deficit and he wants to make cuts. I was incredibly encouraged by that fact, but we know that making those cuts, it is going to take a lot of collaboration and work as House Democrats and Republicans have come together in our tie, working then with the Senate, eventually with the governor, to see what the cuts really mean. What we do know, though, is cuts on the backs of our students or our seniors, those that are really struggling, those are really off the table. That is not a fair way to do those cuts when we look at the growth of the government here in the state of Minnesota. Those continued conversations will take place, though. The other thing that was encouraging is that the governor has acknowledged fraud. For 6 years under his leadership, fraud has gone unaccounted for. There's been no accountability whatsoever within his agencies. And to know that he is finally taking that serious, I have to think that is because of Republicans pushing in the House to have the Fraud Prevention and Agency Oversight Committee that will be chaired by a Republican, Chair Kristen Robbins, with a Republican majority for the next 2 years, really addressing on the issue of needing to prevent fraud here in the state of Minnesota. That was encouraging to hear that the governor is also starting to recognize that and wanting to do things. We know when you hear finger pointing to Washington and the things that may be happening in Washington, we know finger pointing does not pay for or create our roads, our bridges, fixing and lowering energy costs, providing that funding for schools. So finger pointing right now in the state of Minnesota has no place. We have to focus with what we know, which is that expanded, unsustainable spending in the state, finding budget targets that will work. House and Senate and governor don't quite align right now. We need to focus on governing here in the state of Minnesota And even with a 23-day delay in the House of Representatives because of our Democrat colleagues not showing up for work, I believe we can still get this work done, obviously in a bipartisan fashion, but specifically on time. By May 19th, we can get this work done. It is going to be a push as we go forward over these next few weeks, but we can get this done, and I have full confidence in that. I want to turn it over to my colleagues. We have Leader Niska and Senate Leader Johnson here with us, and I want you to be able to hear from them, and then we'll take just a few questions toward the end.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Speaker Dameth, and thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I think what the best part of that speech tonight was it was short, so we can get back home here and get back to work. So we've been seeing the governor constantly be talking about the federal policies that he believes are coming. And the reality is we need to be focused here on the state of Minnesota. For the last 2 years, Republicans have been cut out of the room. And now we're starting to see the consequences of that. We're seeing a budget where we have a deficit coming at us of $6 billion. We need to take that and really figure out what the solution is. The governor's solution is to shift that on to taxpayers, to take that and put it onto our counties. Over $500 million he wants to shift onto our counties. The reality is we can do better. We can do much better in this state. We are one of the highest tax states in the nation. We don't need to be going back to Minnesota taxpayers to get that money. We can figure out how to prioritize this money. On issues that we have across the state, we found areas of compromise, of areas that we can work together on. One of them is the waste, fraud, and abuse in this state. That finally, after 6 years, the governor is finally coming to the table and saying, we've got a problem. Yes, we know that. We've been saying that for 6 years, that we have a problem. We need to address that right away. We're going to make sure that we're putting Minnesotans first, that we're not taking it out on Minnesota schools. We're not taking it out on Minnesota local governments. That we're doing the right things here at the state capitol to make sure that our kids are the best educated, that our streets are the safest, that Minnesota is the place that people want to come and live. That's what we're putting Minnesotans first. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Leader Niska, and you can finish up.
Yeah, thank you. I want to echo Speaker Dameth and Leader Johnson's point that our job as leaders here in the state of Minnesota is to be focused on what we need to do here in the state of Minnesota. And the job that all of us should be doing, what the governor should have been doing, is an honest reckoning of where we are at, the costs of the one-party Democrat control that have gotten to this place, spending an entire $18 billion surplus, putting us in a looming $6 billion deficit, the costs to our businesses, the cost to our schools, the ways that our schools are being harmed by state policy, and the way that we're failing our students and our communities, and how we're going to work together in this divided legislature in order to get the job done in the state of Minnesota. And unfortunately, what we saw tonight is a continuation of what we've seen from Democrats here, where instead of talking about those issues in Minnesota and those challenges in Minnesota, they constantly want to engage in a Trump deflection strategy where everything is the fault of Donald Trump or of folks outside of the state of Minnesota. I understand that that's good politics for their base, that their base likes to hear, instead of reckoning with the challenges that we have in the state of Minnesota because of Democrat policies, they want to talk about Trump and attack Trump. It was really unfortunate that while there was maybe not quite an olive branch, but maybe a few buds from an olive tree given by the governor, most of it was overshadowed by a quite frankly angry rant about Donald Trump. And I don't think that serves the state of Minnesota. I don't think that that's the path that we should be taking as leaders in Minnesota. We have to work together. We have to work across party lines. There were a few things in that speech that I think all of us can agree with. The overdue need to take on fraud in the state of Minnesota, the overdue need to reform some of the way that government operates in the state of Minnesota and make it work more for the people of Minnesota. And I hope that we can find a way here in the next few weeks to get past the national politics, then the name calling, the finger pointing that we saw in the speech tonight, and instead get to work on the issues that Minnesotans really need us to work on. Thanks.
level, there was quite a bit of talk about collaboration, unity, how that's been a theme this legislative session. I'm curious, but I mean, what did you guys make of those bits of the speech?
I do want to just go back to the last 2 years in which doors were physically shut in our faces when we tried to have Republican voices heard, when stakeholders were coming to the Capitol to try to make those adjustments to these bills that would make them sustainable and things that Minnesotans across the state could get behind. And so finally, after 2 years, when they've run out of money, when they finally got to this issue of a $6 billion deficit, when our schools are just buckling under the mandates, when our communities are having troubles with our businesses, are starting to look outside the state, then they come to Republicans and say, well, let's work together. It's 2 years too late, but we're there. We're at the table. We aren't missing these meetings with the governor, with the leadership, both in legislature and the governor's office, trying to come back, trying to fix this and figure out solutions to this state. So, yes, I love the rhetoric. We're going to be there working with anybody that's willing to put their, put their head to the grindstone here, their nose to the grindstone, and get this thing done, because it has to happen. Otherwise, Minnesotans are going to be feeling the pain real soon.
Speaker Damon, did you feel like this was addressed to the state or addressed to the nation? What do you think? Leader Niska talked about that a little bit.
I would say both on that, actually. I think it's important, though, as elected leaders here in the state of Minnesota, Minnesota has to be our first priority. That is my expectation for every one of the members serving in the House, in the Senate, and our governor. Make Minnesota a priority. Focus on what we need to do here for the people of Minnesota first, and then if there's other aspirations, that should come later. We have just a few short weeks, again, started 23 days late because of Democrats not showing up for work. We can still get this done on time, but we have to focus on Minnesota, on what we know, the financial picture that we have been left with. We will be able to get that done and over the finish line.
How has that delay affected your progress just overall?
23 days is a lifetime in session. You might have heard earlier from some of my colleagues across the aisle that we don't really get a lot done the first few days of session. I kind of smile when I think of that, though, because that is also the party that wanted a full-time legislature last year. So we need every day that we work. Those first 23 days are very, very key. House Republicans were in there doing the work as far as informal hearings, different things that we could do to prep us on the issues on every one of the committees that we could. Even though we had that delay, we are committed to getting this done on time in a way. So how does it affect us? It's a challenge, but we can work through that. We definitely don't need a full-time legislature.
Speaker Damon, what do you make of Governor Walz when he was talking about the deficit? He said it was nobody in the room's fault. What do you make of that?
The deficit that has been created, the spending of the $18 billion surplus, raising taxes and fees another $10 billion, and that just happened in 2 years. Governor Walz has been in office for 6 years. He has signed every single one of the bills that has brought us to this point. At a time that we could have used the $18 billion of surplus and maybe gotten ahead or set more away and planned for an unknown future, that was not the case. So I believe that there is a responsibility of some that were in the room.
Just for context on that too, if I could, Mary. So we went from a $52 billion state budget up to a $72 billion state budget in 2 years. And it's going to look more like a $66 billion budget. But think of that, from $52 billion to $72 billion, 40% growth in the state. And so for the governor to come back and say, this isn't our fault, this isn't the Democrats' fault over the last 2 years, that's pretty disingenuous.
Gaslighting.
I would just add, he said a lot of really crazy things about Donald Trump, like that President Trump is trying to intentionally harm the country. For someone who turns policy differences into questions of motive about somebody else like that, it's really pretty amazing that he's not able to take responsibility for the budgets that he himself passed.
Madam Speaker, yesterday you said that the State of the State speech was an opportunity for the governor. I think you said pull the parties together. Did he meet your challenge tonight?
I think that there was quite a bit of push toward the federal issues that are either true, not true, created, however you want to look at that. I think that he did a fair amount of positive talk when it comes to fraud and needing to make reductions. When he talks, though, about making sales cut taxes, but expanding that base of sales cut or expanding the tax basis. You know, there are other things that he talked about that seemed unifying, but when you dig into the surface, it is still pretty heavy party talk right now. So I think the better question with that and the better answer will be given in about 3.5 to 4 weeks when you see where we land.
Where do you stand on the increased surcharges for HMOs?
You know what? We have to look at everything right now, but the growth in government at this point, over the last 2 years, 6,000 new FTEs added to just the state government. There are other ways to cut and be more responsible than just dumping something on a health company.
You mentioned I think you mentioned, you didn't say it explicitly, the long-term care waivers and long-term care being such a cost driver. You mentioned, Speaker Dameth, you wanted to protect seniors. Are you having productive talks with Democrats in terms of limiting the growth of long-term care waivers and limiting that kind of expensive cost?
You know, we are still stuck on a couple of things on our health budget, but our human services budget, even though there were some reductions made, Democrats and Republicans in the House, our chairs, co-chairs came together and did a phenomenal job coming up with a budget that will be able to get passed off the House floor. So those talks are still going on. We know they have to match up with the Senate, but that work already has been done in the House in a bipartisan fashion to this point.
Speaker, what in the governor's speech wasn't true? You alluded that some things he said about Trump or the federal government wasn't true.
You know, when we look at some of the claims that were being made, we know the idea of a Medicaid cut, you know, when he had talked about Medicare cuts before and things like that, that was never in the budget that was being moved through Washington. That was an untruth. It's a great headline, but when you dig into the words of where it actually was, that didn't happen. There were just a few other things. I know you had cut a couple of those too, things that just didn't quite line up, that they make great headlines, but when you dig in, they're not exactly true.
Were you not concerned then that the federal government will make massive cuts in Medicaid? Is that something you see as Walz kind of just inventing, exaggerating?
You know, what we need to do right now is we need to work on the Minnesota state budget, and whatever changes come at a federal level, when those actually, if they actually come through, that is the time to deal with those cuts as known. What we shouldn't do in the Minnesota budget right now is continually adding costs outside of what we can afford, knowing that there could be changes on a federal level. We need to be responsible in what we're doing. That's our focus right now.
This would be a question for anybody who wants to answer. Sensing some disappointment, glad that he talked about this and that. Do you think this speech did any harm to, you know, the bipartisan work that you will have to do, or do you think you're kind of in the same position that you were at 7 o'clock tonight?
You know, I think I don't know if you want to add to it, but what I would say is we met with the governor, the 4 leaders, we met with the governor this afternoon, and he said, you know, he was going to hit some things pretty hard at the federal level, and he obviously did that. I don't think it did anything to necessarily hurt where we are, but I don't think there was any great revelation that brought us even closer together of the work that needs to continue. Kind of a little bit more neutral in a way. I don't know your read on it.
Say so. I mean, it's kind of like that old cartoon where the sheepdog and the coyote would clock in and they'd beat each other up, and then they'd be, you know, they could work together on the backside. But that's kind of what it's like. We expected some hits today too, but overall, we have work to do. We got to make sure that we're putting Minnesotans first, check our ego, and make sure. But reality is, we're going to be back in the governor's office trying to work on deals going forward. It didn't hurt it, but what we need to do is make sure that we're focusing on Minnesotans' needs. When the school boards are coming in there, superintendents, when the small businesses, making sure that we're listening to them, not doing these red herrings with the federal government and what the administration might be doing and whatnot. So let's focus on Minnesota. That's the top priority. You know, we can have all this rhetoric on the outside, but the reality is we got to get the work done in 3 weeks.
Yep. You know, there's the human service spending and there's K-12 spending, and that's 70-some% of the budget. And I wonder where all this money comes from that you're going to cut if you take health care and disability and K-12 off the table.
No new tax increases. That's what I can guarantee. That is a non-starter for House Republicans at this point.
Do you have some specific places that adds up to solving your budget problem?
That work is still being done. You know, we're going to hear the first budget bills that are going to be on the House floor tomorrow, and you'll see that work continue through over the next few days, and I think that'll give a little bit better indication of where we're at in the House. Right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.